Good morning. If you clicked on the video, then you know why you're here. No, not for me to cut off a finger, because only 3 of my subscribers know that I'm actually a carpenter by trade. Anyway, I want to get an X-Max. And in order to get an X-Max, I need to get better at the Max. Which means I need to build a cool kicker to learn how to get better air control. In my previous life, I was a punk, I was a skater, I was a freestyle BMXer, and I built a lot of ramps back in the day. I want to use that knowledge from my youth and my carpentry skills that I have now to show you guys how to build a sweet kicker that's going to launch you to new heights. Some of the pitfalls that guys have, and I've experienced this from my youth too, is the actual size of the ramp. Here's the thing, can you fit it in your current vehicle if you're going to be transporting it? Are you going to be transporting it? Is it going to be in your backyard? So make it the right size for your needs, right? Second of all, is it going to be a beast? Everybody wants to make this monster thing and launch 40 feet off the... If you can't lift it by yourself, because you have no friends to help you or hang out with, then you need to make it the right size so you can manhandle it yourself. Thirdly, you gotta think about what kind of trucks or vehicles you're gonna be launching off of it. If you're going around with, 14th scale or 16th scale, you can get away with almost like a cardboard kicker. It's gonna work. But if you're going something bigger, 10th scale, 7th scale, 5th scale, X-Max, then you have to build something a little bit more substantial. Substantial enough that it's gonna be able to hold the weight and the consistent impacts of a vehicle hitting it at like 60 miles an hour. So let's quickly go over some of the materials that I'm going to use today. I've got a piece of scrap 3/8 material. It's quite flexible and it's going to be able to handle that curve really well. Now the sides, you can use something really substantial like 7/8, 1 inch, you can go solid birch, anything. But if you use something cheap and lightweight like this, I'm only using 1/2 inch ply, that's going to be more than enough. So I have a triangle piece, but I have one nice square edge along here, so I'm going to use those as my starting points for my measurements. Now I know that I've got 40 inches wide is the biggest I can go, 30 inches tall is the max that I can go on this side, and I've got about 5 feet, so I can do a run out pretty good. But we want to use like a 45 degree. What you're seeing here on this cut is pretty close to what we've got. So if your math here is say 20, then you're going to want to have 40 inches here, like a 2-to-1 ratio. Your square edge 30. Mark that nice and clear, and then same what your measurement was here, double that, which is 60, which is 5 feet, and mark that like so. Now in order to get a really sweet gradual kick, you want to have a longer run out, and then it slopes up and then cuts off like that. What you need is something that's flexible and that can make that gradual slope, and then you can trace it out. So if you have something like a 1/2 inch PVC pipe, or say, even a fishing rod that can do that flex, then go for it, use that. I'll show you what I'm gonna do though with a piece of PVC. Pretty cheap from the hardware store, it's like $8. So we wanna make sure that our scribe line is right on that point. So take a nice number 2 Robertson deck screws, Canadian deck screws. Kind of lock it in place, as you can see right there, and I'll do the same down at that end. So you've got your anchors on the front face to keep that line straight, and you want to put a couple of screws or fasteners on the back side to hold your shape. So that's me maybe being a bit of a perfectionist about it. I must have reset those screws about 40 times, but I think that that's like a I think that's gonna be pretty sweet. So I propped this up on a couple 2x4s, and because this is a square end, like a factory end, I can line these up and then line it up here, as well as lining this up flush along here, and screw them together and basically nail it all with one cut. I'll take some longer screws and lock them together in order for them not to move around. Now most of you are mechanically inclined because you're into the RC hobby, but if you're not comfortable with power tools, just take some time. Take your time to get to know what the tool does before you use it. Use your situational awareness just like you would with an RC car, and where you set the saw down, make sure that the guard is properly working on it, because if that thing is rotating and hits the ground with the guard back, it will come right over top of your foot and you'll be spending the rest of your Saturday in a hospital. Like, I've got these things on, but the reality is they need to go off and real ones need to go on when I'm cutting. It's just as simple as that. Again, a Saturday afternoon with a doctor digging something out of the back of your eye. So now that I got my gussets cut, I have to strap them together and brace them across, keep everything rigid before we sheet it. I've got some 2x2, which is actually 1.5 by 1.5 inch, and we're gonna measure that out to width minus the thickness of our side gussets in order to make sure I've got the proper width to fit in the car. So we know that my width is 40 inches, so half inch means that the pieces of lumber in between can only be 39 inches to achieve 40 overall. So I'm just gonna start with 2, so I can put one at the top and one at the bottom just to hold it together, and then I'm gonna fill it in probably between 10 inches and 1 foot on center as we go up to give it that smooth rigidity and fasten the plywood to. I'm also going to use longer screws. I got some 3-inch decks. That way when they go in, the smooth shank will pull tight on the ply and the threads will catch very deep into this lumber. Now you don't want to countersink it more than the head, because if you do, you're going to start punching through each individual ply and it's going to become very weak. So the trick to the first one is to bring the first piece back just where it meets, right there. You don't want it to be proud or you're going to have a little hump and you won't be able to get the plywood flat. When I screwed it in, I followed the plane of the ply pretty much the whole way down, right? Now you're gonna get a nice flush seat for your sheeting. Because I used 1/2 inch ply on the sides, it's really, really thin here. I won't be able to fasten any screws for my ply into this. It's not gonna hold very well. I've added a 1x4 on the bottom, and I use the same principles here as flush. You don't necessarily have to do this, but it just, in my world, because I made it thin and lightweight, I'm just adding a little bit more reinforcement down below. So I'm also gonna add a full-size 2x4 at the base. Now that we have our frame in place, we can put the ply on and sheet it. A little tip, when you are doing your screws, if you put them in the very center, then you can line up on either side, center points, and then fasten into there as you go. Made the deck a little thicker than your typical like door skin, but because of that and the steep pitch of this ramp, the plywood won't have the flex without putting too much strain on it. So what we're gonna do is kerf the back of the plywood. So what kerfing is you set the blade depth to 1/8, which is 1 thickness of one of the plies. Now this is 3 ply, and since I'm gonna be screwing it all off, it's gonna become quite rigid. So we go into the back and we kind of break the back of it, if you will, and kerf every, I don't know, 4 or 5 inches, and it'll allow that plywood to bend a little bit more, but still maintain its rigidity. I'm gonna be using shorter screws obviously for this. You don't want to punch it through. We've only got 3 layers of ply here, so if you go too deep, it'll just pop right through. So you have to be a little bit gingerly when you put them in place. And I'm using, again, number 2 Robertson, because Robertson, and they're 1.25 inches long. Let's work our way with our body weight from the bottom. You'll hear it starting to crack, and then fasten it as we go up. So I've got one side screwed off to the substrate underneath, not to the plywood yet. Now I'm gonna do the other side, and then infill in between. Also went and put extra screws along the top and screws into the plywood, so plywood to plywood fastening after I did the substrate fastening. So I did put horizontal lines, as you may have saw, just to help me guide across, but vertically I kind of just eyeballed it as I went down. Now these ugly strap lines, I'm gonna throw a sander on that and get them out, just to make it look a little bit nicer. I will say this though, it's plywood. If you leave it in the rain, it's gonna pucker, swell, it's gonna delaminate and be all bubbly, and it's gonna ruin all your hard work. If you're not planning on painting it or staining it or treating it of any sort, take it out of the rain, cover it, throw a piece of plastic on it if you have to, if you want to keep it raw like this. And just so you guys see, the weight of this is so lightweight. One hand, I can pick it up with one hand. That's awesome. If you use heavier, denser wood, it's a beast. So I sanded down all the rough edges so it's easier to carry. I couldn't really get the rust out of it, but that's okay. I'm thinking about painting it, but you know what? It just looks too awesome. I want to send something. Well, like my grandpappy used to say, John, your idiot son over there needs to grow up, stop goofing around, and go get himself his first buck. Well, I never did any of that. Okay, so I painted it.